So this is stage 16. That's Dexter's apartment. This is where Dexter kept his blood slides. This studio has been my home for more than a decade. 5 seasons of 6 Feet Under and 8 of Dexter. But now, it's all coming to an end. They're breaking down the sets. The world of Dexter is evaporating. See, people are taking things already. One of these 4. Somebody snagged it. I don't think Dexter is particularly preoccupied with environmental issues, to be honest. He puts a lot of fuel in his boat, puts a lot of miles on that boat. I'm talking about it like it's real life, which is kind of how it started to feel. Hair and makeup. Being Dexterized means wearing brighter colors than I would ever wear, and being vaguely Oompa Loompa in my complexion. Inside the air-conditioned, airbrushed world of Hollywood, climate change isn't something you have to think about too much, unless you really want to. But I know I'm living in a bubble, and I know there are places outside my bubble where climate change is impossible to ignore. At the top of that list is Bangladesh, where I've heard that climate change is a matter of life and death.
Everything we thought we knew on climate change has actually been underestimated. The effects of climate change will be upon us faster, intense fashion than we had thought.
We all know that human activities are changing the atmosphere in unexpected and in unprecedented ways.
That the greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. The amounts of snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen, and the concentrations of greenhouse gases have...
There is no more fire season. We have wildfires all year round.
Climate change, extreme weather, call it what you will, and our vulnerability to it.
The 12 years of drought has left the landscape bone dry.
We got any patriots in the crowd?
A new scientific report has determined the last decade was the warmest on record.
Our world is changing faster and more dramatically than ever before.
Getting to Bangladesh means a 12-hour flight from Los Angeles to Turkey, and then another 8-hour flight to Dhaka, the capital. I'm taking this trip because I've heard Bangladesh is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. I want to understand why. It's 6 a.m. when I finally arrive and meet Morshed Ali Khan, a journalist for the leading English-language newspaper here, the Daily Star. He's been reporting on Bangladesh for the last 3 decades, and he's kindly agreed to be my guide. As we drive into the heart of Dhaka, Morshed tells me it was once a small and quiet city, but not anymore. So you've really seen this city expand and grow?
Oh yes, especially over the last 20 years, it's phenomenal growth, you know.
Yeah.
Every day people coming from the rural areas. Right. So employment opportunities, economic growth, you know, in the city. And then climate is also playing a part in it. Water is creeping into people's homes and all this.
Right, right.
You will see over the next few days.
Do you think it would be possible to stop and just step out?
Yeah.
Stretch our legs?
Sure, sure.
Welcome to Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It's so alive.
It is alive, 24 hours.
Yeah. I wanted to get outside my bubble, and I've definitely done that. After I catch up on a little sleep, I decide the first thing I need is a geography lesson. So I head to one of the largest river ports in the world to meet Dr. Atiq Rahman, one of the country's top climate scientists. Can you tell me what it is about the geography of Bangladesh that makes it uniquely vulnerable to climate change?
It's a play of water and land. Bangladesh is extremely flat, and it is the confluence of three of the mightiest river systems. It's a huge amount, trillions of cusecs of water passes through these.
When it comes to climate change, Atiq tells me that Bangladesh is geographically cursed. Sitting at the foot of the Himalayas, it's one of the flattest, lowest-lying countries in the world. Nearly a quarter of the land here is less than 7 feet above sea level. People in Bangladesh have a long history living with water. Some of the rivers are many miles wide, and the country has a 4-month rainy season known as the monsoon. Massive floods are common and have been for centuries. But global warming is making things even worse.
We need the flood for fertility of the land, but a little additional extra flood is what is disastrous. In the central plain, where all the three rivers meet, there has been a 15% increase of area covered by flood over the last 20 years.
Is that climate change?
It is consistent with all the predictions of climate change. Climate change is a shift in one direction, and there are lots of examples over the last 10, 15 years to show that it's going in one direction.
With 150-mile-an-hour winds, Cyclone Sidr was the worst storm to hit Bangladesh in years.
In southern Bangladesh, cyclones are also a fact of life. But lately, cyclones here are bigger, stronger, and more frequent.
Now 4 of them have come in 7 years. Now that's too much.
A combination of 2 cyclones, Sidr in 2007 and Ayla in 2009, left the country in ruins. Thousands of people died, and more than 1 million people became homeless. But the most shocking thing is what he tells me next.
Below that, all will be underwater.
By the end of this century, climate scientists project there will be a 3-foot rise in sea level. And the impact that will have is hard to comprehend.
So about 17% of the landmass, 13% of the present population will be inundated and affected by salt water.
That means some 20 million people in southern Bangladesh will be forced off their land by the year 2100. I can't imagine where they'll all go, but Atiq tells me that a lot of them will end up here, in Dhaka. It's further inland and further away from the cyclones. And it turns out this climate migration has already started.
The trick about crossing streets in Dhaka is that you've got to be fearless, not look to the left or the right, and just keep going, hoping that no one hits you.
Yeah.
Because if you show any fear, you're dead.
Decisiveness is awarded.
Exactly.
I'm with Dr. Omar Rahman. a Harvard professor and vice chancellor of the Independent University, Bangladesh. He's an expert in demography, the study of how human populations grow and change. And he says Dhaka is changing at a startling rate because of migration.
Bangladesh is the size of Iowa.
Right.
And at 160, we are half the size population of the U.S., which is about 314 million. So think of all of the U.S. being packed into Iowa, and that's kind of what you're...
What's the population of Dhaka?
It depends on where you define the boundaries, but it's somewhere between 15 to 20 million. It's now apparently the 6th largest megacity in the world, and it's the fastest growing megacity.
Is there any estimate as to what the population will or could eventually be?
Well, it's supposed to double in about 20 years. Now, whether it really reaches 40 million or not, we don't know.
Suddenly, the skies open, and we run for cover.
Come, wait inside till the rain...
Omar says it's not the season for rain, but lately, things have been out of whack. As we wait for the rain to stop, Omar explains that there are many factors behind Dhaka's mind-boggling growth. A big one is economic.
People have to move to the city because that's where the jobs are, that's where the money is.
What are the primary industries?
We are now the 3rd largest garment exporter in the world. Most likely when you buy something, a shirt or a blouse, it's not surprising that it would be made in Bangladesh.
For decades, jobs have been a magnet, pulling millions of people to Dhaka. But in recent years, Omar has noticed something new. Rising seas and more intense storms in the south of the country are pushing people out of their homes and into this already overpopulated city.
Climate change is exacerbating all of this. It's happening much faster, and we are having to deal with it in a much shorter time frame.
Now, up to 2,000 people arrive here every single day, and the city is struggling to absorb them. Omar offers to show me what these new migrants are up against. I feel like I'm intruding, but Omar nudges me forward, saying that those who live here feel proud and honored to welcome guests.
Should
I remove my shoes?
No, it's okay.
No?
As long as you don't go out for it.
Hi.
Like 10 of them, but sometimes it goes up to 15. This would be considered a good living space in the city. And you can see it's not very much.
Yes. Thank you.
This is the communal kitchen.
Hello. Thank you.
কয়জন এখানে সব মিলে?
এখানে আছে
100 জনের মতো হবে? There's a tap there.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Most places don't have a tap. This is potable water. This is from the water supply. They have electricity, a little bit of an outhouse there. This means that they're much more fortunate than most people. The new migrants wouldn't get any place anywhere near as good as this. Climate change affects the whole world, but we in Bangladesh are in the eye of the storm. I mean, it's sort of like being a canary in a mine in a way. I mean, it's going to happen to us earlier, and so how we adapt to it is going to be crucial in terms of teaching the rest of the world of how to deal with these issues.
After I say goodbye to Omar, I go for a walk. I feel like I'm seeing the city with new eyes. I'm still overwhelmed by the sheer number of people here, and it's hard to imagine what this place will be like when there are millions more. It also occurs to me that these Bangladeshis have done almost nothing to cause global warming, especially compared to an American like me. But it looks like they'll have to pay a much steeper price. I'm starting to understand how climate change is tipping the scales for people who are already facing difficult odds. And now, I'm on my way to meet with someone who studied that effect up close.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Tasneem. Michael.
Welcome to Dhaka.
Thank you.
So have you been to a rickshaw before?
No, this is my first time.
Okay.
Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui is a political science professor at the University of Dhaka. She is also the founder of its Refugee and Migration Division, an organization that fights for migrants' rights. How is the issue of climate change intersected with your work with migration?
It's very complicated. We thought that it has to be studied and found out how much is it migration, is climate stress related, and how much of it is, other types of migration.
Tasneem found that 75% of the migrants in her study moved partly because of climate-related events, which had affected their ability to make a living back home.
Their livelihood isn't sustainable. So therefore, they come to Dhaka so that they can have a proper income. But living standard is very bad. They don't want to stay here.
I got a sense of the living conditions yesterday. But Tasneem says an even bigger concern is the working conditions for migrants. Many of them end up getting jobs in the country's $20 billion garment industry, where they often work for less than $2 a day in extremely unsafe factories. Proof of that is what happened just last year, not far from here, at the Rana Plaza garment factory.
In Bangladesh tonight, there is a desperate search for survivors after a clothing factory collapsed.
Rana Plaza made clothes for many top Western brands. To increase production, the owner illegally added floors and crammed people in.
More than 3,000 factory workers were inside when the building collapsed Wednesday.
377 people were killed.
551 bodies have now been removed from the ruins of the 8-story building.
More than 1,000 workers died in what is now considered one of the worst industrial accidents in history. So, Tasneem, where are you taking me now?
Oh, I'm taking you to meet climate migrant Shahidul Islam.
And why is he at a rehabilitation center?
I was following him for quite a while. He was working in Rana Plaza, and now he's taking therapy here in this center. He's under treatment.
What does Rana Plaza have to do with climate change?
Oh, Rana Plaza actually doesn't have anything to do with climate, but those who migrate, they end up in jobs like this, where security and other things are not ensured. So that is why he's here.
Right. Shahidul's injuries are hard to look at. I feel unprepared.
He's saying that we are next to Rana Plaza. One day there was the building where I used to work. Now nothing is there. Nothing is there. I don't know how God saved me.
What do you remember from that day?
আমার শেষ নিঃশ্বাস ওখানে শেষ করব বলে আমি আল্লাহর কাছে প্রার্থনা করছিলাম। আমি নড়াচড়া করে আমার পাওয়াটা বের করব। এমন কোনো পরিস্থিতি ছিল না, উপায় ছিল না।
He's saying hours after hours he was shouting that please help me, even if you have to chop my leg off, do that, but I want to see the world. I want to be alive. So then they really worked with him for 3 hours to take out all the rods from his body, and then they rescued him.
How much time passed between the building's collapse and your being found?
After 8 hours. He had a person who already expired just beside him.
Because of his injuries, Shahidul can't do a physical job anymore. He'll need to find a career where he can sit down.
He's not feeling good. He doesn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, let's get out of here. At the rehab center, he's learning to use a computer. Given everything he's been through, I'm amazed by his optimism, drive, and hope. When we sit down together, I want to finally hear the story of why Shahidul left his home in the South.
এল্লা সিডার বারবারই মানে হওয়ার কারণে আমাদের দেশে আমাদের গ্রামে অনেক ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয় ফ্যামিলিরা অনেক কষ্টের পরে চলে আমার নিজে প্ল্যান করলাম যে আমি তো বাবার একটু হেল্প করার দরকার আমি অনেক বড় হয়েছে
Is there any chance that any of your 4 younger siblings will choose or be required to migrate as well?
হতে পারে তাহলে আমার তো অ্যাক্সিডেন্টের জন্য আমি এই হেল্পটা করতে পারবো কিনা এটা তো শিওর না একটা ছোট ভাই আছে আমার
ছোট ভাই আছে
How old is he now?
11 বছর
11 he's now 11 but gradually he might have to
Yes. When you first came, did you miss being home and do you miss it now?
আর মায়ের কথা ভাবছে
মায়ের কথা মনে হচ্ছে সবচেয়ে বেশি so he missed his mother the most that's all Bengalis will miss
You could argue that Shahidul was a victim of bad luck, being in that factory on that day, being in the path of the 2 cyclones that forced him to leave his home. But how can you argue that climate change isn't stacking the deck against people like him? And now, I want to see what life is really like where Shahidul came from, in the South, which I'm starting to think of as the front line in this country's battle against climate change. I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to take me to your village. I would love to visit.
তো ও অনুরোধ করতেছে তুমি কি ওকে ওর গ্রামে তোমার গ্রামে নিয়ে যাবা এটা দেখার জন্য
হ্যাঁ নিয়ে যাব
জোরে বলো
নিয়ে যাব
he will take you to his village and তাকে ধন্যবাদ না তোমার সাথে কথা বলার জন্য
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Shahidul leaves first. I'll meet back up with him in a few days. A bus ride home would take him over 10 hours. So I bought him a plane ticket that will get him there in 45 minutes. It will be his first time on a plane, and probably the best $60 I've ever spent. Previously, on Years of Living Dangerously.
Welcome to Bangladesh.
Thank you. Bangladesh is the size of Iowa. So think about all of the U.S. being packed into Iowa.
So you've seen this city expand?
Yes, every day people coming from the rural areas.
This would be considered a good living space in the city. And climate change is exacerbating all of this.
They're forced to come here.
Oh yes, water is creeping into people's homes.
17% of the landmass, 13% of the population will be inundated.
How much of this is affected?
Below that, all will be underwater for 1 meter sea level rise.
Chad Tilley, a former U.S. Air Force pilot, has been flying relief missions in Bangladesh for the last 8 years.
Have you flown a bunch of small airplanes before?
Yeah, a few.
Okay. Have you been in a seaplane before?
No.
Okay, cool. First time. Copy, clear for takeoff.
I've spent the last few days in Dhaka, Bangladesh's overcrowded capital, where thousands of new migrants are arriving every day. Now Chad is taking me south, to the part of the country where most of these migrants come from. I want to see what's making them come to Dhaka.
Michael, you look at Dhaka, it's kind of like Legoland. If you look, you'll see just buildings everywhere. That area off the left wing is the most densely populated square kilometer on the face of the earth. 144,000 people per square kilometer.
It's crazy how quiet this city seems from the air. And before long, we've left it behind completely.
Unlike in America where we have a lot of rock and gravel in our soil, here we have muddy kind of soft sand. The water can do with it as it please. You see how all these fields are reflecting back, not just the river, all still water. You see how all this area is still underwater.
I've heard people call Bangladesh a land of rivers, but that didn't prepare me for what I'm seeing. There's water everywhere.
In your experience, is it raining more lately or more intensely?
I've been here for 8 years, and I fly down here weekly, daily.
Yeah.
And this is some of the highest water level that I've seen in my time.
Right.
I believe that I'm flying in the midst of climate change.
Right.
Alarm clock moment for the world, because this report will tell us again that everything we thought we knew on climate change has actually been underestimated. The effects of climate change will be upon us faster, intense fashion than we had thought.
We all know that human activities are changing the atmosphere in unexpected and in unprecedented ways.
And that the greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. The amounts of snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen, and the concentrations of greenhouse gases have...
There is no more fire season. We have wildfires all year round.
Climate change, extreme weather, call it what you will, and our vulnerability to it.
12 years of drought has left the landscape bone dry.
We got any patriots in the crowd?
A new scientific report has determined the last decade was the warmest on record.
Our world is changing faster and more dramatically than ever before.
Okay, guys, we're going to come and land in the water now. Please make sure your safety belts are fastened. There it is.
Yeah, that's no dinghy.
I'm finally here, in southern Bangladesh. There's so much water in this part of the country that boats are the main way to get around. And for the next few days, I'll be living on one. The ML Balawi. I asked Dr. Atik Rahman, the climate scientist I met earlier in my trip, to join me down here. You're an expert. I am admittedly a novice, and I've come here and learned...
Well, we are trying to learn.
No, and I've learned a bit, but the more I learn, the more I realize how much there is to learn and how complicated the problem is. I was wondering if you could share with me some of your thoughts about climate migration.
All the predictions are that there is going to be huge migration around climate change in the decades to come. Now, when we ask the local communities, now that you had one cyclone, two cyclones, three, and fourth one, what is your feeling? They don't want to go.
It's like taking someone from their mother.
Yeah, exactly.
But while these people may not want to leave, soon they may not have a choice. Cyclones are getting more intense. Two recent ones, Sidr and Ayla, left more than 1 million people homeless. And other more subtle changes in the climate can also wreak havoc here.
We talk about the sea level rise going up by 1 meter in 2100. Now, that's not what ordinary people are worried about, 2100. They are worried about their next meal. And that is being affected by climate change impacts. For example, these people have learned a very fine-tuned agricultural system, but if the rain comes 10 days earlier or 10 days later, they won't know where to sow their seedlings, which is the basis of
the next plants. And if it comes too heavy, then it's a flood. And if it's a flood, then the seedlings die. So they don't have the seedling for the next crop.
And there's another threat to the crops that we can't even see. Salt.
What happens is when the cyclone hits, salt water is pushed further north into the areas which were otherwise very arable and giving good crops.
In 2009, Cyclone Isla pushed salt water so far inland that 5 years later, much of it is still there. And the rising sea level only makes this worse.
So a cyclone not only destroys the trees and the infrastructure, but also the agricultural crops. Once they are covered by a layer of salt, the productivity isn't there. Many of the efforts we are doing to eliminate our poverty will be severely hindered by the impacts of climate change.
Atiq tells me that after a long history of famine, one of his country's greatest achievements is that it now grows enough food to be nearly 100% self-sufficient. But climate change raises the question, for how long? Walking through this mud, I am beginning to understand how fragile life is becoming here.
I'm Michael. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
There were two villages from 2009, Isla, that has really swallowed these two villages, devoured it, as they say.
Seeing these remnants of people's homes makes it hard to grasp why they try to stay. Especially because all of this will eventually be underwater.
If they're forced to go, then go to the nearest embankment for a temporary shelter. The next stage is the urban centers like Khulna, the local city they would go to. And the last stage is the slums of Dhaka, which are overcrowded. So it's not very easy to say, hey, let's go. You know, it's not a picnic, it's life. Projection shows that by 2050, 2070, between 20 and 30 million Bangladeshis are going to be displaced. They'll have to be accommodated somewhere.
As I make my way through southern Bangladesh, what I'm seeing is hard to take in. Half-submerged trees, houses built on stilts to keep them above the rising water. There's something apocalyptic and otherworldly about it all. I come across a family whose home, perched on the edge of a riverbank, literally washed away in the night. Now, they are searching for another place to live. And a few days into my trip, I see one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. A floating hospital.
Hi, Michael.
Runa Khan is the co-founder of Friendship, an organization that provides health services to the most inaccessible places.
Living here is the challenge. You know that disaster is going to strike you. So they work towards the months in which they know that it happens. You know, they know when the floods come in, they know when the seasons of the storms. So they're prepared. What happens when it comes without that preparation and it keeps coming and knocking you out every time you want to stand on your feet? And that's what's happening.
What diseases and health issues have you seen increase?
Skin infection due to the salinity and being in the water all the time. Diarrheal disease, ARI, respiratory tract infection, gynecological problems, like even childbirth becomes so difficult. Mortality rates of the mother and the child increases. Due to the climate change, not only is there a health issue, there is a livelihood issue.
As I tour the boat, I'm struck by all the unforeseen impacts climate change can have. But I'm also amazed by how resilient these people are. How hard they're trying to hang on to their lives here. It makes me wonder, how much can people adapt? In order to stay here, people will need a way to grow food, even as salt water creeps further and further inland. It's one of the biggest challenges they face. And I heard about an American effort to help.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Welcome.
Look at this palace afloat.
Yeah. American Ambassador Dan Mosina has served in the U.S. Foreign Service for over 30 years in countries from India to Angola. He says he requested this post in Bangladesh because he fell in love with the country during a previous assignment here.
We're off to visit a rice paddy, and we're going to see some comparisons of different rice seeds. We'll see a traditional variety, and we'll see an improved flood-tolerant variety.
Dan tells me rice makes up 80% of the diet here, and Bangladeshis take pride in their rice.
There are over 500 varieties of rice in Bangladesh. You know, we Americans, we think of white rice and brown rice, but they have 500. What's really special about the flood-tolerant variety is it has the same flavor of rice as the traditional variety. Otherwise, people won't eat it. They won't grow it. They have to have the taste. I must say, I've become a rice snob, too. You can really see it here. You see it? This is the improved variety that is stress tolerant. Yep. And this variety will endure, and listen to this, being completely submerged for up to 15 days, whereas the other one, you know, after 3 or 4 days, it's going to take a real wallop.
This kind of work is obviously making this land more usable, but all estimates suggest that within several decades, this part of Bangladesh will be underwater.
It's sobering, but as I look ahead, I think people can adapt.
Yes, but I do wonder if adaptation has its limits, and we may one day come to a place where we discover that it does. But for the time
I think
being,
you're right.
I can tell the ambassador is a naturally optimistic person, but he also appreciates how serious this threat is.
The rising sea levels, the increased weather extremes, often these are very theoretical, abstract notions. They're not theoretical and abstract here. These are real, and where we are right now, this is the frontier. No textbook here. This is just reality.
And he says the consequences could reach far beyond Bangladesh.
A failed Bangladesh, a Bangladesh that has not adapted to the impact of climate change, a Bangladesh that implodes, that's a tremendous security risk to the region and to us.
Southeast Asia is already a politically volatile region. To understand how climate change could create even more conflict, just look at a map. If the estimates are right, by the end of the century, tens of millions of Bangladeshis will be forced out of this area. If the country isn't able to provide another place for them, there's pretty much one place they can go. And India is already making it clear that it will go to great lengths to keep them out. I'm with Morshed Ali Khan, the Bangladeshi journalist I met back in Dhaka. He wants to show me how dangerous the life of a climate migrant can be.
India is your biggest neighbor, and people find it easier to go into India than to Dhaka. And yes, there is a threat. Lots of people cross this border, Michael, and many of them illegally. Many men, women, children get shot dead by the border security force of India.
Wow.
You can go this way. That's India. You know,
So beyond this pole here is no man's land, they call it?
Yes, I think so. We can always ask how far we can go. Aro koto dur jete parbo amra? O dada, ekjon shune. Amra to film banabo, amra ain bhongo korte chai na. Amra gelam edike. We are allowed to go.
Morshed tells me this is considered one of the most dangerous borders in the world. I'm not sure how far I want to go.
Many of these houses are used as, you know, fast stopover for the aspiring migrant.
Mm-hmm.
So they spend the night here. In the middle of the night, they're just smuggled across.
Already, millions of Bangladeshis have fled across the border to India and are living and working there illegally, leading India to get very serious about stopping any more from crossing.
Let's walk a little faster, Michael, can we?
Sure.
Yeah, up to the fence, and then we get back. It's not a very safe place, you know?
Morshed says the Indian security forces have killed nearly 1,000 Bangladeshis.
Our threat is from the Indian side of the border. If they find that somebody is trying to intrude, they'll shoot and then talk, if he's alive.
Until a couple of years ago, they maintained a shoot-on-sight policy for anyone trying to cross without permission.
So just across there, you can see the fence, have a better view of the fence, just there.
Yeah, that's a long walk.
Yes.
Very exposed. Do you think any members of the Indian Border Police can see us from here?
Yeah.
Hello?
Dum, dum, dum.
Good one. All right, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
I've never been to such an eerie place, and I wonder what will happen here when millions of Bangladeshi homes are underwater.
And I don't know if that fence would deter people from trying to go across, you know. I don't think so. They're desperate. They're desperate.
Yeah. I'm heading to a district called Shatkhira, a few miles away from the Indian border, to see Shahidul, the climate migrant I met back in Dhaka. After 2 cyclones devastated his home, Shahidul moved to Dhaka and almost lost his life when the building where he worked collapsed. Hello, Shahidul. Thank you. Thank you for meeting us here.
Hi.
He says he's very happy to see you. And his house is 5 kilometers away from here.
Okay.
So he's inviting you to go with him to his house. Tahato?
This way? Okay.
Sit down.
Oh, it's nice.
After
the disaster, you never thought that I would be able to come back home.
Can I ask, how did you feel when you heard that Shahidul was heading to Dhaka to work?
She says they didn't want him to go anywhere. That Shahidul's father didn't earn enough to run the family, so he had to help. He says that Ayla devastated his house.
Where was your house before Ayla?
Just here.
Would you be willing to show us the site where the house once stood?
Yeah. Kevin? আচ্ছা চলেন যে বাসাটা একটু দেখেন মাইকেল let's go. This is where his old house was. Ayla destroyed it, and then he shifted across the road.
Yeah, you only moved right across the road. You didn't go any further. Why?
He doesn't have any land elsewhere. Right. So this is the land he found suitable.
I imagine the experience of Ayla was very scary. What was it like? What do you remember?
Everything was swept away by the high tide. You know, I preferred to save my children rather than my belongings.
Of course. Do you fear or even expect that a storm like Isla will come again?
আপনি কি মনে করেন যে ওই আইলার মতো জলোচ্ছ্বাস আবার হবে? Allah knows.
Right. Right.
Sense.
Thank you. At the end of my trip, I share a meal with Shahidul. Soon, we're both going back to Dhaka. But really, we're heading in opposite directions. I'm on my way home, and he's leaving his. He was only able to visit his family for a few days. It's hard not to think about how different our lives are. It feels like we're in totally different worlds. But I've seen how connected those worlds actually are. Because what my country puts into the air is affecting more and more people like him. It reminds me of something Atiq said.
These are young people, many of them are restless, and they're being displaced, and many of them now understand the causal relationship, that it is somebody else's greenhouse gas that's causing my displacement. Shahidul represents that whole phenomenon. This is an issue of environmental justice and global human rights. Why are these people being displaced? Who has caused their displacement? Who is going to pay for it? And where are they going to go? If 70% of Bangladesh land is going underwater for 1 meter sea level rise, if another country came and invaded for that piece of land, every Bangladeshi will give their life and fight. Now here, who do we fight? Somebody has to take the blame.
And somebody has to lead the way toward a solution. Because eventually, climate change will touch us all.
Well, whoa! We are ready, aren't we? How about this one?
I have been searching all of my days, all of my days. Many a road, you know, I've been walking on, all of my days. And I've been trying to find what's been in my mind as the days keep turning into night.
A sprinkle of rain falls on the soil, and from that soil comes life.
Well, I have been quietly standing in the shade all of my days. Watch the sky breaking on the promise that we made. All of this rain. And I've been trying to find what's been in my mind.
I love you. I'll see you this afternoon, okay?
As the days keep turning into night. So I smile, I know I'll feel this loneliness no more. All of my days. For I look around me, and it seems you found me, and it's coming into sight as the days keep turning into night. As the days keep turning into night.